day to everybody. My name is Clara, I'm Brazilian, I live in Salvador. And my case study that I'm going to present.
D'abord, je voudrais remercier Marianita et Olivier pour l'invitation.
I'd like to thank you for your invitation. And after what I saw yesterday and today, I decided to start my presentation with the end. I'm going to show you a video which is part of a film which is called Minhocão.
Minhocão sont des lombrics en portugais.
Which are a kind of brick in Portuguese.
Então nós dividimos em duas fases. A primeira fase
Il y a deux phases.
São de obras estruturais.
Attends, je vais expliquer avant.
Let me explain first. This film was done for a Frenchman called Raphaël Grasset. At that time, the architect, who's called Alfredo Brito, who is not the architect of the original project, but is the architect of the regeneration project. He's president of the Residents Association. He's showing the projects to the inhabitants, the renovation projects, the refurbishment projects. And what's important for me is that what I'm interested in is the expressions of the inhabitants as they're listening to different stages of the project.
Aquilo que bota em risco a segurança dos moradores, que bota em risco a segurança do imóvel, que bota em risco a estrutura dos prédios. Então, na primeira fase, que vai custar mais de 11 milhões, e nós vamos estar nos próximos dias fazendo a publicação da licitação, vai ser feito toda a parte de telhado, das pilastras, das rampas de acesso, das muretas. Com toda essa primeira parte estrutural, nós vamos estar fazendo de imediato. Paralelo a isso, junto com a Associação de Moradores, junto com a Secretaria de Cultura, nós vamos estar captando, através de um projeto de incentivo, da Lei de Incentivo à Cultura, recursos junto com a iniciativa privada para fazer restauração. E aí, com o conjunto restaurado, isso abre a possibilidade de ser feito um programa de visitas, ser feito incluído no circuito cultural, histórico da cidade, isso reverter também em renda para a comunidade, para ajudar a conservar, para ajudar a manter o patrimônio em funcionamento. Uma outra ação que faz parte também de cuidar daquilo, de cuidar de quem já tem o seu lar, de quem já conseguiu o seu espaço, é a regularização fundiária. É a regularização do título de propriedade. Muitas vezes, a gente diz, olha, eu queria aqui fazer uma reforma, para dar uma melhorada, mas não vou fazer porque eu não sei se amanhã ou depois vão me tirar daqui, se amanhã depois vão arrumar aqui alguma coisa para dizer que essa propriedade aqui não é nossa. Então isso, você precisa dar essa segurança de cidadania. E regularização fundiária é sempre complexo, porque cada caso é um caso, tem que ser analisado individualmente, saber a quem pertence hoje o conjunto. Ainda está com o governo federal, foi passado para o Estado, são documentos que vêm da década de 50, de 60, precisam ser desencavados aí nos cartórios da vida para que a gente possa dar uma solução. Nós daremos a solução. E eu espero que a gente possa rapidamente estar concluindo o processo licitatório, rapidamente estar dando início às obras, com a colaboração de cada um de vocês, a gente possa fazer um grande trabalho aqui, possa dar uma qualidade melhor de habitação a cada um de vocês, possa dar o título de propriedade a vocês e possa devolver esse patrimônio completamente restaurado, aí não só a vocês, mas a toda a população da...
Donc, maintenant je commence.
So now I can start.
Mon étude de cas,
My case study,
pour mieux comprendre,
to understand,
je lui donné 3 noms.
I've given it 3 names.
Ici, je
Not
lui
me.
donne 3 mots. Nom.
Here I give it 3 names. Pedregulho,
Minhocão de São Cristóvão
Morocco de Casablanca,
e Conjunto Residencial Prefeito Mendes de Moraes. Je commence par Pedregulho.
I'll start with Pedregulho.
Pedregulho
Pedregulho is the name given by the modern architects and the institutions and the architectural students. In the original project, which was designed by an architect called Alfredo Ricci. The second name, as I said, this means it's those buildings, and it's the name given by the residents and users. Morocco is because the shape, and San Cristóvão is the district where it is, the neighborhood where it's located. There are 2 big estates of this kind in Rio. There's San Cristóvão, which is this one, and that's why it's called Cristóvão, in order to distinguish it from the other. And the third name, Conjunto, is the official name registered by the municipality, which I'll explain later. So Pedregulho is the original project. The architect is a very well-known modern Brazilian architect. He produced some very fine buildings, in my opinion. And this project was designed in 1946, i.e. at the same time as the projects for Marseille, which are very well known, I think, in France. So this project has 3 residential bars. There's the first and then 2 small blocks or bars behind. All 3 residential. And there's also a laundry, which is here, a health center, a crèche, and a gymnasium for sport. They are duplex apartments. That's the big residential building there, with its curves. These are the original photos from the start of the project. And here's the architect. What I find is very important to say here is that Pedregulho was a big modern project of social adaptation. So now, in parenthesis, there are researchers who say that the moderns are the best-known architects who developed the ideal of modernism and the ideal of the modern and utopia. And modernists and modernism is the proliferation of this ideal, the massification around big estates. Pedregulho was built by the municipal architect. It was directly built by the state.
Ils ont la permission pour l'utiliser.
They don't own the apartment, but they have authorization to use the apartments. They pay no rent.
C'est une idée développée
It's an idea developed by
Alfredo Reid et
an architect.
L'ingénieur Carmen Portinho.
His wife was a well-known engineer. The couple at this time developed the idea. At the time, they were animated by socialist ideals. They were interested by Soviet urbanists. So it was developed for collective life. That's why you have the health center, the creche, the laundry, and the sport, all within the same estate. So he was animated by the idea of social transformation. And he talks us about architecture is pedagogy. He's a new modern man. The idea was to develop the modern man. That was the ideal. For this to work, there was very complex regulation, rules in relation to behavior and the use of the shared spaces. And that is why they had social workers constantly visiting the buildings. It was planned in 1946, but it took 10 years to build. When it was built, there was a new municipal authority which had different ideas, and Pedregulho the municipality was no longer particularly interested in the estate. So this new name appeared at the time when the inhabitants began to transform the space themselves. To explain Minhocão, I'll start with my master's research, which I did in 2009 and finished in 2012. In 2007, it's important to say this, I lived in Paris, and I was an intern at the laboratory here with Alicia. And I returned to Brazil with a new anthropological way of looking at the world, anthropological architecture, and this new way of looking at the world doesn't allow me to show you the physical transformations that have taken place. So what I thought, in order to understand how the inhabitants were appropriating their space, I thought that I had to go and talk directly to the inhabitants. So on the basis of the question that I asked myself at that time, I was lucky enough to be invited to work in an artistic event that was take place at Pedregulho, and I had the possibility of living in an apartment within the estate for 6 weeks. There was an artistic collective which occupied an apartment, and I was a sort of guest architect. I lived in the apartment with them. So in January and February 2011, which is the same year as the video was made that I showed you at the beginning, and I'll also show you a bit later. I'm going to show you some photos I took at the time.
Après cette expérience, pendant cette expérience,
During this experience, I was able to start developing
j'ai
ideas
commencé à me poser des questions.
and asking myself questions.
Qui habite dans ces appartements?
Who lives in these apartments?
Comment elle ou il s'appelle?
What are their names?
Comment il gagne sa vie ou elle gagne
How
sa
do they make a
vie?
living?
Ça fait combien de temps
How
qu'elle
long
habite au Morocco?
have they been living there?
Qu'est-ce qu'il fait dans les week-ends?
What do they do at weekends?
Est-ce qu'il aime les animaux?
Do they like animals?
Et ça continue.
And so on.
Donc, pourquoi ces genres de questions?
So why those kind of
J'ai
questions?
remarqué pendant la recherche que
During the research, I noticed
transformation a été faite dans
that
l'espace.
regardless of what transformation had been done on space, it had been done by
À
somebody,
partir de ses
by
besoins,
a person
de ses
on the basis of their
désirs,
needs and their
des
desires,
disponibilités de temps, des matériaux,
the time available, the materials, and their creativity
j'ai commencé à remarquer
and
que
inventivity.
les
I also
transformations
started to notice that the
à l'espace
physical
ne sont pas
transformation of the
jamais la même.
space is never the same.
Ça dépend toujours de qui le fait.
It always depends on who does it.
Je m'explique à travers des deux exemples.
So let me show you two examples to explain what I mean.
J'ai pas de photos, mais je vous explique.
I have no
Au
photos, so I'm going
premier
to explain.
étage,
On the first floor,
quand on tourne à droite,
when
après
you
les
turn right
escaliers,
after the stairway,
les habitants
the
font
residents
tous les dimanches
every
ensemble
Sunday
avec un barbecue.
get together for a barbecue.
Donc ça pourrait jamais arriver s'il y a quelqu'un qui n'aime pas le samba ou il y a quelqu'un qui
That could never
n'est
help.
pas très gentil pour permettre que ça arrive.
That could never happen if there was somebody who tried to prevent it.
Au cinquième
Somebody didn't like the
étage,
samba or barbecues. On
quand
the
on
fifth
sort des
floor,
escaliers, on tourne à
when you
gauche.
come out of the stairway, you
Après
turn
le-
left.
le troisième appartement,
After the third apartment,
on rencontre des grilles.
you find grills, barriers, a gate,
Et il est fermé avec la clé.
and it's locked.
Donc, ça se passe parce que les
And that's
habitants,
happened because
après l'ARA,
the
ils se sont,
people who live beyond there,
comment on dit, ils sont mieux, ils sont avec plus de sécurité. Ils se sentent dangereux.
they feel better if there's more
Et
security.
les trois habitants d'avant,
And the three
en fait,
residents
ne
before,
sont pas insécures. Ils ont pas envie
they don't lack
de
security.
rentrer.
They feel no need to be able to lock some door to keep people out.
Donc, ils n'ont pas mis la porte. Donc, ça sont
So they haven't tried to shut off their place. So that's two examples of different relations between neighbours.
ça, c'est les photos du dernier jour.
That's the photo I took on the last day.
Et après, je vais vous montrer aussi.
And after, I'm going to show you,
C'est la même film.
it's the
On va
same
réaliser.
film.
Maintenant, c'est notre partie. Ah. Merci.
Thank you.
Je vais juste vous expliquer.
And just let me explain what
En fait,
this is
la
about.
vidéo, c'est la même vidéo.
It's the
mais
same
c'est
video,
une partie.
but it's another part of the video.
Et vous allez regarder.
Je comprends bien.
Ouais, c'est pas trop lent. Et en plus, Youssoufi qui est ça introduit après. C'est là, je ne saurais pas longtemps.
Ok.
C'est les gymnasies et les lombriques, les grands lombriques. J'avais envie de montrer parce que c'est notre regard. Ah d'accord, ici. C'est notre regard. E ici. Donc, conjunto residencial prefeito Mendes de Moraes, ce monsieur-là, il est le président de l'association.
This man here is the president of the association. From 2011, the mayor of Rio started the realization of the restoration of this in a new contemporary context. It's not a rehabilitation conceived by the inhabitants. It's a restoration from their manner of living.
Qui a envie de rencontrer les projets modernes d'origine, mais à partir de ces formes et pas à partir de l'utopie de transformation sociale. Donc, ils ont pris les projets d'origine.
So they took the project of the origin that suggested a utopian way of living as the inspiration for the restoration, and here is the building today. And it was at this moment that I showed you the video where the inhabitants were listening to the transformations that would happen to the building.
Ici, en fait, ils n'ont pas retiré les habitants tout de suite.
They didn't take the inhabitants out of the building straight away, but first the apartments started to cost more, and so the inhabitants left the buildings themselves.
De la mairie pour éviter que ça s'arrive. Et donc, je vais terminer.
And so I'm just going to finish my presentation now with these two photos.
À gauche,
to the left, it's 2011
avec les appropriations,
with the appropriation, and then after on the right, 2015. And that's all. Thank you very much to everybody.
About Casablanca in Morocco. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. So I'm going to present a case in Casablanca, which was the material for a study by two people who are going to speak to you this afternoon. So everything began, as we know, in Ulaanbaatar, which is just nearby. with a workshop with La Villette Architecture School, which was presented with Alain Galine and Camille. So we've seen similarities and differences between what we've seen in our own country. For Anna, it was the same kind of building. In Poland, the treatment was different, while what I've seen in Morocco was similarities in the transformation by the inhabitants. They're quite different buildings from what I've seen in my own country, but which have been transformed in roughly the same way. So then we extended this diversion via Poland and Poznan to go to Casablanca with the aim of studying these buildings, and which have been extensively transformed and no longer resemble us at all. And when we got there, we discovered a building which is much more close to the type of estate, the district we were looking at. Let me tell you about the emergence of Casablanca. The city was formed and became what it is today. That's its geography. In 1907, it was a small town of 20,000 people, initially a fishing village. The Medina, the old town, consists of 3 sub-areas surrounded by fortifications. So there was a Medina, which is quite middle class at the time, and a semi-rural area, and then some precarious housing, and then Mela, which was for the Jewish population. And we can see the army camps started to settle around this central area, and the city developed somewhat separately from the initial town. Here we can see a symbol of colonization and how the city grew with the emergence of the port and how it became opened up to the world. And we're also going to see the initial outlines of an economic geography with concentration of activities on the coastal area and the creation of a triangle between Fez and Al-Gadir, which was a source of agricultural production. Here we can see that Medina was essentially populated by local people, and the modern city began to develop outside the old city, on the edge of it. And we can also see, as you can see on this map, the black points that were added were populations that came from the rural exodus who settled in Casablanca because of the development of an industrial zone with the creation of jobs. And so they had good reasons to want to move at that stage. That led to a form of improvised nomadism. People arrived. And so what we had was eventually a densification of Medina. We saw a proliferation of slums, because there was not enough space for new populations. In 1914, Henri Prost was appointed to produce the first urban plan for the city, to create a sort of coexistence, harmonious coexistence between the local populations and the incoming populations, and also to produce a hierarchy within the city, this developing city. So there's an industrial zone created in the east. The central zone is dedicated to activities and shops, which is still the case now. And the western zone at the time was a kind of recreation area for the wealthy classes. There's bathing and seaside activities. So as you can see, in 1950, the city was a kind of mosaic with lots of diverse elements added. And as you can see, that because of the densification of the central part and rents that became beyond those of people coming beyond the resources of those from the country, a lot of people settled on the periphery of the city, which obviously created disorder, because this was outside the zone planned by Henri Prost. In 1940, demography is on the rise. And this is linked with the rural exodus and meant that the housing shortage got worse and worse. In 1946, Mr. Ekosha arrived on his motorbike and was appointed head of the Urban Planning Service department and created the housing program for the majority. He obviously studied the past in order to plan for the future. I could see what happened in the Medina to plan what would subsequently be constructed, both in terms of the home units, but also for wider districts. He also developed a zoning pattern in order to plan for this public housing. There's a very dense population. You had 8 or 10 people living in an apartment at the time. And the Medina no longer had a space for such a large population, hence the creation of all these peripheral districts. And this Ekosha plan was obviously much disputed because people like disputing things. So he wasn't that well liked by the population. So with this introduction, you can see that within 1 century, the city has developed from a village to a megacity. And even today, after this very fast development, this fast development continues. So now let's look more closely at our site. So, which is located right on the tip, as it's called. It's called the elbow, Casablanca elbow. So the site became within the fell within the administrative boundaries in 1912. At the same time as the protectorate. At the time, the first point of the site was the here you can see the lighthouse, which was the first object, and then subsequently the Judeo-Christian cemetery. So this site became a hospital. The lighthouse by Monsieur Laprade. In 1930, the site was still completely empty. You can just see the boulevard starting to emerge. In 1940, the military barracks was settled south of the cemetery, and on the peninsula, what the inhabitants now call the center. It was just a place of sheds and depots. It's now full of squatters. Morocco's excluded populations who live on the peninsula there. Now you can see the boulevard that develop a network of structure across the coastal area, and which becomes a place for marathons, races. And in 1958, we can see these blocks which have emerged from the ground, and it's on these blocks that represent the next stage of events. So now we'll close in a bit on this area. First, I'd like to say that opposite the estate is an estate dedicated to the royal administration, which has now become a very dense living area and rather deteriorated. So this is an overview of what I'm talking about. And the other side. And here we can see the coast with all the seaside activities that have moved in there. In 1980, we see the appearance of villas on the southern hill on the side. We can also see the military barracks has been demolished, which would be followed by a new program. In the 1980s, we see the emergence of the Hassan II Mosque, which has led to the gentrification of this district, and the villas we talked about earlier, which are gradually settled, which initially were so expensive, but not at all accessible to local people, maybe to aristocrats and Europeans, but have gradually become home to quite a diverse population. But the price of land has reached the same level as megacities all around the world. It's very popular, attractive area. And here on the space where the military barracks was, we have this, which is a genuine real estate fiasco. 2 of the 9 buildings have been completed. It's called the Cité des Arts, the arts, City of the Arts, which corresponds to nothing of what is planned or is there. And the quality of this estate is very much inferior to the one I will show you subsequently, which is much more aerated and open. So now we'll do a close-up to the central scale of the estate. Initially, this district was intended for a so-called Jewish population, Israelite as they were called at the time. There were several projects on the site, but just this is not what was actually built, but I just thought I'd show you that there were several ideas for the site. It began with this block here, which was on the lighthouse site in 1950, which was a kind of prototype for this kind of housing. And ultimately it's quite different from what eventually came to be built. It's the only one that has no outside staircase. Then the rest of the land was bought between 52 and 53, and the general construction began. The initial block looks like this. There are entries on the edges which were supposed to be public, but were actually appropriated subsequently. So very, very airy, agreeable apartments, which people really loved, and are still very popular. That's a standard apartment layout. So we can see what was the initial housing program. We see the emergence of the first amenities. There was supposed to be a synagogue, a school and a hospital, but given that the recipients of the site evolved over the time, the synagogue was not built, it's just the school and the cinema. In the 1960s, there was a Muslim working class population that began to move into the estate, so not the Jewish population. So they demolished the houses of the people who were living there and rehoused them in other districts. In 1956, the term Israelite housing was changed to economic housing, which is more inclusive rather than ethnic and cultural. In 1980, when the Muslim population was well settled, we see that a mosque had replaced the initially planned football stadium. Many more schools than before, and the amenities followed the desires of the inhabitants. This is a view from the mosque. From here we can see the whole estate. It's a site which is now very attractive at urban level, and even tourists who come to visit Casablanca go there. There's the Judeo-Christian cemetery, which is one of Casablanca's main cemeteries, and even on a smaller scale, the site's mosque attracts many people from the surrounding districts. So here you can see it with the lighthouse in the background. And there's a whole set of educational and sporting amenities The common land is used all the time.
Il y a plein de services aussi, des
There,
hammams,
in terms of
tout
services,
ce qu'il faut pour que le quartier...
there are bakeries. There's everything that's needed for the district to
plein de
be able
commerces
to
également, un
survive.
marché informel quotidien.
There are loads of shops. There's an informal market every day, which we can see here.
En faisant une rapide répartition des
And
horaires
by
des
doing a
activités,
distribution
des
of
activités qu'on peut
activities
observer
over the
sur place,
day,
on voit que c'est vraiment,
you
le
can
pic
see
entre
that the
10 et
peak is
10
between
heures et midi,
10 a.m. and
le
midday,
marché informel où
which is
le
the time of the
quartier
informal market
extrêmement vivant.
when this district
Voir
becomes
aussi.
very lively.
D'où le terme d'accident.
Hence the term of happy accident that I used to
Le
describe.
volet humain. Là,
So
on
the
parlait des
human
transformations
aspect.
récurrentes.
So we're talking about
La réalité,
resident
c'est
in
que-
transformations.
c'est que comme plusieurs cas qu'on a pu
As we can
voir,
see, as in many cases we've seen during this colloquium,
l'intime des cuisines sur le privé, on
uh,
devinait ce qui se passe à
there's-
l'intérieur des appartements.
you can guess a bit what goes on inside the apartments from outside. Everything that could be privatized has
Et
been,
puis, tout ce qui n'était pas censé l'être.
and
a
that
également
everything wasn't supposed to be privatized has also been privatized.
la vie des gens à
So you can
travers,
see people's lives through what they show on the street.
les interstices aussi sont
The interstices are also very well used and inhabited.
les animaux aussi s'y sentent très bien. Ils
Animals
partout.
also feel well. You find them
sont
everywhere.
les coursives également.
And on the galleries,
Je vais montrer ça.
corridors.
Ça, parce que les coursives sont un élément
Because
essentiel,
the,
surtout à Casablanca,
the galleries are
c'est habité,
a vital element in Casablanca. There's sun all the time. It's a place where people really spend their life. It's very widely used. And you can see that how much life there is on them because, by the way, that people who've privatized many of the gallery areas outside their apartments. The lower spaces, the blocks have been completely privatized because people complain that they don't have the space to hang their linen as people on the upper floors do, so they've privatized the space. So how's it that in 2017 people are still on the site 60 or 70 years afterwards? It's because of a key system. They buy a right to occupy the apartment, and it's something that right is passed down. It's called the key. For nominal rent, and it's passed down from generation to generation. And in order to sell the key, there's a kind of transmission from one person to another, and it is the operator of the site who is paid. We visited the site. We spoke to quite a few residents. I'll present you a couple. It's the block that I presented to you before. Even though these apartments are quite large compared to the others, people nevertheless annex everything they can in order to increase the space available to them. What we also did in situ was to survey the day-to-day activity, and based on the density of the apartments, we could guess what people do at night time. So the dimensions of the apartment relative to the number of people living, that were quite generous. So what we see is that afterwards there are different categories of space. We can see their proximity, with their proximity to the sea, even though 3 people live in this apartment because they have a child. This space is dedicated to the accumulation of mattresses which are unfolded when the family come in summertime to stay. So instead of having a room for the child, they preferred to keep a kind of latent hospitality space, which we found in many apartments we visited. This is the second building, which is one of the standard blocks. The laundry has been annexed and is now used as a kitchen, and the galleries are kind of been privatized, so nobody can get into the end. Here the density is much greater. You have 7 people in a 3-room apartment. It's quite a strange typology because the lounges are changed into hospitality spaces. So they're lounges that are converted into bedrooms in the evenings. So these rooms have a double function during day and night, a dual function, so it's a very fine view. What we also saw on this site are these spaces which have a kind of conditional liberty because we know that they're free, but we don't know how long they're going to stay that way. We have an idea. There are a lot of questions that we wondered about when we arrived on the site. For the moment, these spaces remain unoccupied in a sense. There's no construction on them because there are a lot of events that happen there. There are festivals, there are major events, both at national and national level, which mean that the space remains free, but I guess there's a lot of land pressure. You can see that. With a marina arriving, the value of these kind of plots is rising very fast. But every day the local people are always using these spaces, and obviously they're very attached to this space, which means that this land here is still free. Well, the reason for that is that there's also a district opposite, which is called Cité Mocanis, which is a standard kind of construction, 8 meters by 8 meters with a patio inside. So it's become hugely densified. So these are not places nice to live in, but the people are still very attached to them because their proximity is seen and what they offer in terms of quality of life. So you can see that in this 8 by 8 layout, you have 11 people living there, with multiple generations and multiple wings of the family, and so everything is here. The whole apartment is transformed from day to night. It's a highly modular space which can use different functions, employ different functions during the day and at night. The argument that people take, the idea that there is a plan to rehouse these people on the grounds that their living conditions are unhygienic, but the aim is to rehouse these people in Nassim. With the government plan, there are 3 options, which is either to rehouse people or is either to restructure the slum areas and give them a proper urban status, or to allocate people social housing or rehousing, relocation, which is essentially to attribute land, give people land to build on themselves, which is the equivalent of 2,500 euros for people to gradually build their own houses. But that land is at the other end of the city. So obviously they don't agree because their work is, they work in the street. They have additional costs, transport costs, and they also lose their source of income, which might be guarding nearby villas or local work of different kinds. So as soon as they're rehoused, they lose their whole revenue structure and social structure. So all this rehousing is due to the arrival of a magnificent project, which is this project. This is the Casablanca Marina. I'm afraid it hurts my eyes personally. I'm sorry, but that's the reality of what people build today, and the investments are obviously colossal.
C'est ça qui grignote l'espace.
And it is this that's kind of chewing its way into the space, that's causing rehousing and relocation. It's something being built for visitors whom we don't know, who will probably never know, and we're not particularly keen on knowing. That's what it's going to look like. That's what people want to build today in this magnificent city that's full of social richness and human richness. There's another project which is also which began in 2016, which is linked to link the mosque to the lighthouse. So to conclude, the decision makers take advantage of precariousness as a source of arguments. So to kind of relocate these inhabitants, it runs counter to the spirit of the place. What they want to do is destroy this sociability in this site. Modernity has left indelible traces in Casablanca, a little everywhere, which reflect the antagonistic drives between experience and plan and reality and intention. And it's these 37 buildings, these 2014, which are gradually shifted and moved and employ different. And the people who live in this place, originally considered unhygienic, who have gradually moved to this place and come to accept it and come to enjoy it. And now today, once again, they want to be the aim is to uproot them. They defend it against land speculation, against cranes. 60 years later, they have become the heart of the old city, against the sea, against development intended for nameless visitors. The inheritors of this urban form, largely rejected by the city, whether the human living place, give us a message that is engaged and committed. This kind of body left, passed from generation to generation, is now waiting to be read.